Senior reporter that is, Chriselda Lewis. She actually covered the visit of the elders last month. They were in the country for the Nelson Mandela 100th anniversary celebrations. Annan was with Gracia Michelle addressing the elders conference. Chriselda now joins us in studio. Very good evening to you, Chriselda. You know, in having a look at the tributes that have been pouring in all throughout the course of the morning, making mention to his contribution towards peace, to his contribution of rules of law. He then also attended the Nelson Mandela lecture, which took place in July, of which he is a chairperson of the elders. Take us through his role as being that chairperson.
In fact, he became chairperson of the elders, taking over from Desmond Tutu in 2013. And quite surreal, would point out as well to what Sherwin just alluded to, that he certainly didn't seem like he was unwell, but true to what many have described as a man who was out there to do the job. We saw a Kofi Annan who, during marking the centenary of Madiba, talk about bringing 100 sparks of hope to South Africa. We saw them planting trees and basically singling out 100 organization people who were basically doing good for Madiba. And we could certainly take some of the ethos, the ethics of Madiba and place those right at the doorstep of the late Kofi Annan, because certainly he played his part when it came to issues of peacekeeping. You'd recall, of course, in Burundi, he stood side by side with the likes of Madiba in trying to bring about peace there. So through and through, Kofi Annan spoke about changing Africa in the clip that you showed there, where he spoke about the challenge still being with Africa. So in the conversation that you will see on your screen now is one of the last conversations that was had with Kofi Annan, where he basically spoke about the ideals that many leaders should really espouse in order to move Africa and the rest of the world forward.
There's so many of you. Right, very good. Done? Thank you.
And whilst I have before, let me say that many people are working on these issues. We as elders do.
Thank you very, very much.
Good afternoon, my dear friends. And Madiba, it is wonderful that we gather here on your birthday. It's enough. We can't take this anymore. It must stop. You are making a difference. So work with us and let's move on. Thank you.
Oh, the famous photographer. And they hit him and he fell. And on his back, he took pictures of it. I do not despise former Secretary Generals of the United Nations, but some of them were rather high up and they did not understand.
Still in conversation with Chriselda Lewis, of course, covering that. Chriselda, as much as there were many events in which he had under his tenure, let's just talk about some of the challenges and the type of characteristics that he had as a leader to be able to facilitate the change, to be able to be instrumental in those peace talks that we saw take place in Kenya, as well as his involvement in Darfur.
A lot of what I've heard here today, including from what Sherwin had said, and if you just browse through most of the international media, is that you're talking about someone who really had a passion for peace building and ensuring peace on this particular continent. Basically, he had taken the African agenda forward when he was in his tenure at the United Nations, but not, of course, without controversy. You'd recall, for example, while he had set up the Human Rights Council and the Peacekeeping Commission, if I'm not mistaken, yes, there is the commission, you'd find that in 2005, for example, that's exactly when we saw a ballooning of scandals, including the All for Food program in Iraq, for example, saw issues of alleged corruption, where we saw issues relating to alleged sex abuse by United Nations troops. So those are some of the issues that started really to balloon even after he had left office. So it's going to be a week of delving into this humanitarian, the great work that he did for Africa, a true African who stood up for those who basically couldn't stand up for themselves. Because if you look at, for example, Shante, what they really espoused this time around in bringing the 100 Sparks of Hope to South Africa and to plant that here in honor of Madiba, these are people who were doing good across different spectra, across the world. We're talking about health, education, and a number of other sectors as well, which showed that Kofi Annan, together with the rest of the elders, were really championing a good cause, not just for one particular sector, but to ensure that humanity itself would be better and espouse the ethos and the values of people such as Madiba, which I think he really did look up to. One picture in mind that really does come to top of mind is when they took that picture with Madiba together with the rest of the elders, and when he became chairperson, you sort of saw a change in the manner in which the elders had chosen some of the projects that they were doing. And in speaking to one of the communications directors of the elders this afternoon, telling us about how he gave leadership, how he always wanted to ensure that the work itself needed to be done. And if you look at Burundi, for example, those are one of the issues I had mentioned. He didn't work alone when it came to issues of peacekeeping. If we look at the most recent aspect of Zimbabwe as well, the elders could have simply packed up in South Africa and left. But we knew the message that they were spreading ahead of the recent elections in Zimbabwe, that they wanted to see a Zimbabwe that was going to restore itself to its former glory and ensure that all parties were going to come to the table and ensure the election there was successful.
Now, just very briefly, just before we wrap it up, you know, many a times when we see these great leaders, we see them on screen, we see them on TV. You as journalists, you get on the ground, you meet these people, you feel the type of auras that some of them bring when they walk into a room. How would you describe your experiences with Mr. Kofi Annan?
It was my first and last experience with Mr. Kofi Annan. I can't speak much on that, but I must say, I think what many have spoken about being a very gentle character, he certainly was very gentle in that, but he spoke truth to power. And I think that's exactly what many will hear over the next coming days, because he didn't mince his words when he spoke to me about society today and how leadership needs to change the way that we do things in order to ensure that the world does become a better place. He was not someone who was shy to speak about the challenges, whether he was sitting in front of a leader, world leader that would be considered. He would speak truth to power and ensure that at the end of the day, the suffering of ordinary people, if that would be the case, in whichever aspect he was addressing, he would ensure that some kind of solution is found to the world's problems. Has he done his job? He certainly has. Lots of changes within the United Nations and taking it to a new level, as Sherwin has alluded to, but a lot he has done for the African continent. Never forgot about the job that still remains on African soil.
We'll wrap it up there on African soil, truth to power. That was SABC senior reporter and anchor Chriselda Lewis on the late former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan's role as chairperson of the elders. We do value your comments. You can send them with the hashtag #FullView on Twitter. You can also view this interview if you missed it, sabcnews.com or on our Twitter page.